As Gary mentioned, my name is Fred Headon. I am Assistant General Counsel at Air Canada, based here in Montreal, where, as you mentioned, it's a little late, but not too late so far this evening. But I'm joining the conversation today because of the work that I led with the Canadian Bar Association. I am a past president of the association and also continue to chair their Legal Futures Initiative. This was a project we undertook, started about 5 years ago now, when we started to see simultaneously a change in the demand for legal services in Canada and a recognition that our members were poorly equipped to actually respond to that demand. So we embarked on an inquiry to look at what was changing in the expectations of our clients, to try to understand what were the motivations for them to look for something different in terms of legal services, and then to try to make some recommendations and provide eventually some support, which is now the phase that we're in, to help our members get out ahead of the change, be able to seize the opportunities that are out there in the marketplace, and to provide Canadians with what we refer to as a vibrant and relevant legal profession. We think they are owed that. We think that's something that the legal profession should be doing. But we realize that through our ways of practicing and who we are, through the regulation that we face, and through how we educate lawyers in Canada, Canadian lawyers are pretty poorly equipped to address those kind of challenges that arise when you think about practicing in different ways. So I take it from the work that I've seen that you've undertaken online, that you share at least some of that view, that you think it is important that lawyers continue to provide the kind of service that our fellow citizens have come to expect of us. I hope you'll also share our view that we think that there's very little that's sacred about how we deliver that service, though, and that we really need to put our energies into thinking about how we can do that differently. So delighted to be here and be part of this and answer questions. I did send to Lana Naj the links to our website, where you'll find materials that are not only our final report, but also some preliminary reports, including one on the consultations we held with the profession and with clients, some background material about the state of the profession in Canada and the changes or challenges it's facing. And then some of the material that we put out to help our members. You'll notice that some of the material is behind the wall, so to speak, for members. So if any of it's of particular interest, just drop me a line. We'd be delighted to share that with you. And if after today's sessions, either in this format or the firms you work in, if you have any questions about our work and what we've been up to, I'd be delighted to continue the dialogue.
Thank you for that, Fred. Very much appreciated. Can I start off by asking you, what are the changes that have been taking place within the legal profession in Canada?
So it was, they've been more recent than more historical. We began our work, as I said, about 5 years ago, and I think you would have seen then an awful lot of similarity between our two communities, with the marked exception that we did not have an ABS regime. Law firms in Canada still must be wholly owned by lawyers. Some minor exceptions about family members having a stake in certain firms that gives preferential tax treatment, but not a structure that's been taken up in very great numbers. The innovation we've seen since we've started this work, I would describe as being twofold. We have started to see now a number of the larger firms start to invest in a way they had not previously, in terms of hiring somebody who might be in charge of innovation, starting to try to equip their lawyers with an entrepreneurial mindset and toolkit, and starting now to see the effects of that in certain new products that they might be rolling out to the likes of me, the larger clients of their firms. The second stream that I think is perhaps more remarkable, more exciting in some ways, and will probably intersect with the first stream, is the emergence of a number of entrepreneurs in the Canadian legal market who are trying to solve specific problems. So as opposed to the full-service firm dealing with all your legal needs, these are the people who will come in and say, as the saying goes, I have an app for that. These are the people who have turned artificial intelligence to these questions. They are the ones who are looking to embrace ideas that business is very familiar with in terms of project management, project refinement, data management, data mining, to bring about another way of practicing. That has led to the opening of 2 incubators in Canada, both of them based in Toronto, that have taken the expertise they had helping other startups, other entrepreneurs bring products to market and have now dedicated tracks to the legal profession. And we're seeing there a number of entrepreneurs who are really starting to get some traction. If you have a chance to check out their websites, it's called LegalX, and the other one is called the Legal Innovation Zone. And both of them sort of showcase these entrepreneurs. So I would answer the question, those are two general streams. We have seen some other little flickers here and there. We have an organization that has set up in Walmart. You may have noticed in the debate in the UK as they went down this path, the concern in some quarters that law firms would set up in department stores. Well, it happened. It's not branded as Walmart law. It's called access law. But it's like you might imagine in other of these retail settings, they've rented space from the larger retailer and provide offerings that are their own, but with a heavy reliance on technology and paralegals and a very competitive price point for a lot of routine work for individual clients. That would be one of the ones that sort of popped off the page, perhaps outside of those two larger trends that I mentioned.
I should have asked this at the beginning, but Canada is made up of a number of provinces. Does each province have its own individual legislation to regulate lawyers, or is there a uniform piece of legislation that covers lawyers across Canada?
Very much the former. So the regulation power lies, as you say, with the provinces. They each have adopted legislation to create a law society, which is the regulator with the kind of independence that at least you had before some of the changes that happened there, and similar to what the Law Society in England and Wales would have had. The governance of those law societies rests with the benchers or the board of directors, elected by the members themselves, none of them appointed by the government. Most of them, I think just about all of them now, have some sort of lay bencher representation on the board as well, to bring in 2 or 3 voices out of maybe 15 or 20 who might be from outside the profession but have something to contribute in terms of the regulatory environment.
Is there much uniformity across the provinces in terms of the way in which the profession is regulated, or are there some unique differences?
There are some unique differences. The most striking would be the province where I practice of Quebec, which of course maintained the civil law tradition from its colonial roots with France. Our law society reports, so to speak, into an oversight body that governs all of the regulated professions. And that has allowed for a possibility of a multidisciplinary practice and hence a form of ABS, so long as the other partners in the operation are members of one of the other regulated professions. So sort of as you come up to this oversight body, so long as the other participants are all regulated by it, it's okay to have them in the shop. We've seen very, very little uptake on that model. I mentioned we have some provinces that have allowed family member ownership of law firms along with the lawyer as for preferential tax purposes. And we have also seen one province move to regulate paralegals. You may have seen the Washington State approach, a similar kind of approach there, another one that's looking at it. So those will be the principal ones that are on the books today. There has been a move in 4 of the 10 provinces to move towards entity regulation, which is not something that we have on the books right now. Whether they'll actually get that far is still to be determined.
But at the moment, the lawyers themselves are regulated rather than the entities.
Correct.
You're talking about LegalX and legal innovation. Can you just describe to me the services that they provide and how they provide them?
Sure. If I may just complete my last answer, actually, now that I think of it, while there is no entity regulation today, it's certainly something our report recommended and recommended whether we allow for non-lawyer ownership or not, as something that would be helpful given the experience that we were able to read about in your country and in England and Wales. We think there's some advantage there. In terms of LegalX and the Legal Innovation Zone, these are physical spaces. They occupy office space in downtown Toronto. But it's very much that sort of open concept, kind of fashionable kind of office space these days, where if you're an entrepreneur, you can approach them with your idea and say, here's the problem I would like to solve. We have 2 examples that just come to mind. One woman has developed literally an Apple iPhone app that will guide you through the small claims court process. So she has automated all of the various different forms, is described through the flow of the app how you would go about filing. Another one that allows you to check on the municipal zoning of different plots of land around Toronto. With literally clicking on the map, it will zone in, figure out where you're going. You'd approach the people who run these incubators. Both of them have various forms of para-public funding to them. Say, here's my idea, here is vaguely the market that I think I could serve, here's how I'd like to go about it, but I don't know really where to start. Most of the people participating in these are of two sorts. There are either lawyers who have become frustrated with the practice, or some sort of computer science type who realize that the legal profession is in desperate need of this. Once you go through a pre-screening, what these organizations would offer is that space to work. You may have to pay rent. You may have a freebie for a little time. You may have them investing in the business as a way to get their stake out at the end, and hopefully much more. And they will then provide you with exposure to people who have gone through the process of starting a business and can talk to you about how are you going to raise the money for it? How are you going to operationalize it? How do you find a web designer who can help you with your app? How are you going to identify your market, measure your market, do your marketing when the time comes? Basically, entrepreneur school, but with no dress rehearsal beforehand. The result is a number of these entrepreneurs will fail, as is common as we see in the literature on these things. But the incubator itself makes some money either off the rent and then having a stake in those businesses that are successful. Some of them have been picked up by some sizable operations. And a similar program you may have come across called the Law Without Walls program out of the University of Miami has had some major U.S. venture capitalists invest in some of these kinds of products that have come along. And the hope would be that will be the kind of boost to get some of these up and running a little further. We know that the big publishing houses, Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis, are partners with and closely keeping an eye on what's coming out of the incubators in Toronto as potential new products for them to offer as well.
These incubators are across Canada or only found in Toronto?
We only have the two so far, dedicated to the legal space. There are incubators across Canada. We don't know if any of them who are not specifically dedicated to law, but may have a more general mission, have actually brought in people looking at our world. But so far we have the two dedicated to the legal space in Toronto.
There's a growing trend in Australia and worldwide that we've seen where non-lawyers, corporations, firms are providing forms of legal documents available online and not requiring any input from lawyers. Is that something that you've seen in Canada? And if it is, what has been the approach to those organisations providing those types of documents? Is there any attempt to regulate them?
Mm-hmm. So I think the answer to the last question is there is certainly an interest in trying to regulate this kind of activity. We have not seen in Canada the scale of those organizations that we've seen in the United States. So the LegalZooms and the Rocket Lawyers and such have dipped a toe in here. Axiom, who you may have come across as well, has recently bought a Canadian outfit and is now has a Canadian presence. But as is often the case, when you live next to the giant, they get all the attention, and Canada follows a little later. Their presence, though, has been noticed by our regulators, and the expectation from those, I did a quick little survey, Gary, after your invitation came in, and the expectation is that Canada will follow the U.S. lead, which has been that most of the court cases, I think all of the court cases in the U.S. about these providers have concluded that, in fact, it's legal information and not legal advice that's being provided, and therefore is within the permissible bounds of what they can do without lawyers. It's been interesting, though, how just about all of them have now started to bring lawyers into the delivery of the service. So you can either chat while you're on their web page or set up a phone call or a meeting afterwards with the trained professional. A little like that model I was mentioning that we see in Walmart here, where you rely on others to help get the product to its near-end state, and the lawyer comes in at the end of the process to take a look and make sure that, in fact, the quality was there. I think that's helpful because our research with clients showed that they are very concerned about quality. They would like to know there's some sort of stamp of approval about the people delivering the legal service. So I think an entrepreneur who wants to deliver this kind of a product would be wise to have an option for people to speak with a lawyer. I often use the analogy of going to the dentist, where you now spend most of your time with the technician doing the cleaning and the x-rays and such, but who knows where the red flags are to call the lawyer, or the dentist rather, quickly. And at the end of the visit, the dentist does come to check that everything was done right. And I think with that kind of a model, our regulators are likely to leave them alone. And there's sort of a recognition as well that if they're serving a part of the market that's not being served right now, so long as nobody's being harmed by this, the regulators will probably put their attention to other more pressing objectives. There seems to be a sense that certainly those rogue kind of imposters of lawyers who would be out causing trouble would be another matter. But on the whole, so long as they're providing a service that's not harmful and is serving a need, they're probably not likely to run into many more difficulties here at the moment. And that's the view from the regulator. What the view from my colleagues throughout the bar might be is perhaps another matter, and there may be a bit of a backlash from those who might see it as a real threat. But at the moment, we haven't heard much of that either.
You mentioned that lawyers in your part of the world were poorly equipped to address some of the challenges that were occurring, and that the support was being provided to members to assist them through this next phase. Can you describe the nature of that support?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. So the first thing we did after we issued our report with its recommendations was to look at where those gaps may lie. And one of them had to do with really thinking about your firm as a business in a competitive marketplace, assessing competitive threats, assessing opportunities. And so Richard Susskind, who had been involved in our work, prepared a guide that will help you work your way through on your own in your firm, thinking about what you provide, what your strengths are, weaknesses, threats, and such, in light of the work that we had done, to find a new strategic path, find a new way to ensure sustainability of your firm. It was, we believe, set a record at that point for the single most downloaded document on the Canadian Bar's website. Shortly after that, we issued a guide for young lawyers and students, and it begins with an introduction that explains specifically from that perspective, those who have the longest time horizon, how we would anticipate some of these changes to affect their career choices. Jordan Furlong authored that piece for us very kindly. And we then showcased 32, if memory serves, 32 different legal entrepreneurs with a little short case studies of what did they do and how are they doing it. And their generosity on this was quite remarkable and very much appreciated, as they explained to these students in very simple terms how to go about starting something new and different in the world of law. We're now working on something for our solo and small firm lawyers. That's still about 70% of the Canadian Bar. And they are firms who won't necessarily have the resources to hire a director of innovation, spend a lot of time thinking about what are the needs and weaknesses of the firm, or know how to source the provider. So we're going to be providing them with a bit of a framework as well in terms of how to go through the thought process, at least, of identifying what kinds of opportunities would be there and what kinds of resources may be available to them. When I'm trying to describe to lawyers how they might think of this in the coming years, I try to say, think about the sports teams. I'm sure you have some who are powered by Gatorade or powered by Nike and such. Think about what these other providers could do for you that would let you put your font and color on the product, but the back end is provided by somebody else. And those will be the kinds of tools that will be showcased for the solo and small firm folks. We hosted a very interesting curriculum on education and how to educate lawyers differently. We are going to be releasing shortly a paper on what's being called personal plight needs. So folks who might otherwise have fallen into the access to justice conversation, which was happening in parallel to our work. We recognized there was certainly an awful lot of overlap, but we had a separate project on the go at the time about really that segment of the market that we would traditionally think of as an access to justice sort of situation. This paper will be talking about where those needs lie and how, through greater innovation, one might be able to serve those needs in a more affordable way. I'm optimistic about that paper because it's not the topic for today's conversation, but one of our law societies in Ontario recently had a very animated election for its benchers over the ABS question. There was a proposal coming forward to their benchers to allow for ABS in Ontario. It led to a really remarkable campaign, billboards being put out, a degree of involvement of the media, the mainstream media, not just the legal media, in the election that we'd never seen before. The upshot was they still haven't made that move, but they have come up with a report that tried to maybe sort of go halfway and say, well, if there are these segments of the market that lawyers are not serving, maybe we could let that go to somebody else. And I think this personal plight paper speaks a little bit to that. Those segments of the markets that lawyers today cannot serve in a way that's either affordable or sustainable, affordable to the client, sustainable to the firm. And this is my own view, not sanctioned by our task force in any way, but I find that troubling, that we might say there are legal needs out there that just because we can't find a way to serve should go unserved or served by somebody else. I think there's greater opportunity for others to be involved in the delivery, and that could help get the price down. But if at the end of the day there's a legal element to the problem, surely we ought to be able to say, and here's a lawyer who can help you with that at some point. It just seems very unsatisfying to me to say, just because you happen to be in a lower income bracket, you happen to be a victim of discrimination in your residential lease or something, that we're just going to say, oh, well, sorry, your legal profession isn't there for you. So rather than hiving off whole areas of practice, finding better ways to do it seems more appealing to me, and hopefully this paper will help showcase some of that. We're also working on a paper that will help the law professors integrate more experiential learning into their curricula and give them some of the tools to think about how they might bring in other professionals into the mix as we're educating lawyers. Those two, the personal plight and the education piece, should be out in about first or second quarter of next year. So those are some of the things we're doing. I should also say we've had plenty of interest from our law firms. We've delivered our presentation on this, I think, about 60 times now to firms and law schools across the country, and a few times internationally as well, Colombia, the United States, Argentina. And that, too, has been helpful for firms who themselves want to embark on some of these conversations, to bring in the outside voice, and of all places, the very conservative representative of the profession is coming in to deliver this talk, to get lawyers in the firms to start thinking about how they might do things differently. And that, too, I think has been helpful in changing the mindset of some of the lawyers into thinking about how they can do things differently.
I assume that somewhere in your office is a crystal ball there. Looking into it, where's the next big disruptor for the legal profession?
Oh, I wish I did. What I do have, though, Gary, is a clock, and I work for an airline. So seeing that we're right up against my time, I'm going to start nervous now, because of course we don't like being late in the airline industry, any more so in Australia, I suppose, than here. But let me try to quickly. The next big disruptor, I think, certainly in its scale, will be the Big Four. I think they have found a model that is very appealing to the large clients, at least. But I think we may see that trickle down very quickly. In the slides I often use when I'm presenting our report to groups, I include a picture of some advertising a mid-size accounting firm here has started to run, offering services to help with insolvency problems. So you're in over your head with credit card debt and a mortgage and your car payments and such, and they say, call us and we'll give you a hand. Well, hang on a second. They're going to renegotiate a bunch of contracts, it seems to me. Where's the law firm stepping up to say, we'll put a couple of accountants in the back room to help with the math here, but renegotiating contracts are things that we ought to do. So as the Big Four roll out their models, looking at things that are related to law, but perhaps not things that we've necessarily gravitated to, I think that will be a great source of disruption, not only for the likes of me, but it will trickle its way down, I think, to other pieces of the economy. The other one, though, is simply technology. And the number of people, and this was a real aha moment for me when I came in-house, to spend that much more time with the clients, to spend that much more time seeing things a little more frequently through their eyes, and they see everybody else in their life doing things online, having an online portal that will let them solve part of their problem, bringing them into the process because they're used to being included in the process. I think it's going to be very disruptive because it's not how we typically work, and is going to drive our clients to either go to see somebody like an accounting firm or take matters into their own hands. And I'm really not sure either of those are very good for the legal profession or the people who look to us for help. So I think those would be my two predictions for the coming years.